Claire had always thought she knew her son. She believed she could read his moods, understand his silences, and sense when something was wrong. But lately, something had shifted. Jake, her 14-year-old, had become more distant. He spent most of his time in his room, barely speaking at dinner, and avoiding eye contact whenever she tried to talk to him. She assumed it was just the teenage phase, the quiet rebellion that parents always talked about. Life had been hard since her divorce, and maybe Jake was simply struggling with the changes. Claire didn't push him. She told herself he needed space, but deep inside, a nagging worry kept pulling at her. One afternoon, while Jake was at school, Claire decided to clean his room. She wanted to surprise him, maybe make him feel cared for. As she picked up clothes from the floor and rearranged his messy desk, her eyes landed on something unusual sticking out from under the bed. Curious, she pulled it out and felt her breath catch. It was a large, unopened pack of adult diapers. Claire froze. Her heart pounded as she stared at the pack in disbelief. Why would her healthy teenage son need diapers? She quickly searched the rest of the room and found a few used ones, carefully wrapped in plastic bags and hidden deep in the closet. Panic flooded her mind. Was Jake sick? Did he have a medical condition he was too embarrassed to tell her about? Had something happened at school that triggered this? Her head spun with terrifying possibilities, but none seemed to make sense. She sat on his bed, clutching the pack, feeling like her world had just tilted. She wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but her instincts told her this wasn't something simple. Over the next few days, Claire watched Jake closely. She noticed how he avoided being in the bathroom for too long, and how he flinched when certain topics came up. She remembered the times he refused sleepovers, the strange way he would shut down when his Uncle Mark visited, and how he often insisted on staying home instead of joining family events. Claire had dismissed those moments as teenage mood swings, but now they replayed in her mind like warning signs she had ignored. She quietly searched for more clues. When Jake was at school, she checked his backpack and laundry. That's when she found more hidden diapers, this time used and carefully concealed inside layers of old shirts at the back of his wardrobe. Her hands trembled as she realized this wasn't a one-time thing. Jake had been hiding this for a long time. Her confusion deepened when she checked his phone late at night while he slept. What she found left her cold. There were strange, unsettling text messages between Jake and his Uncle Mark. The messages were vague but carried a weight Claire couldn't ignore. Words like, "Remember the rules," "Practice tomorrow," and "Keep this between us," painted a horrifying picture. Mark had been close to Jake since he was little, always offering to babysit, taking him out for special trips, and spending weekends together. Claire had trusted Mark without question. Now that trust began to crumble, the realization that something was seriously wrong gripped her tightly. She sat in the quiet of her living room, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her chest. Her thoughts spiraled as she tried to piece everything together. The distance, the hidden items, the secretive messages, it all pointed to something dark that had been going on right under her nose. Claire knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was terribly wrong, and the answers she would find would shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. Claire couldn't sleep that night. The image of the hidden diapers and the strange text messages haunted her. Every moment she had dismissed as harmless now seemed full of meaning. The way Jake tensed up around Mark, the times he had asked to leave family gatherings early, the sudden refusal to go on trips that he once loved. All those times she had told herself he was just being difficult, now they screamed at her. She needed to understand what was happening. She needed to know the truth. The next morning, Claire began to pay even closer attention. She noticed that Jake was overly careful about his laundry, always making sure to handle it himself. When she gently offered to help, he quickly refused and pulled his clothes away. His nervousness around her grew whenever she was near his backpack or his closet. His hands trembled when he thought she was about to open something personal. He was guarding his secret with all his strength. Claire tried to piece everything together without alarming Jake. She started reviewing old family photos, videos, and school records. The timeline became painfully clear. About 4 years ago, Jake's bright, playful energy had slowly faded. That was also when Mark had become more involved in his life. At first, Claire had been grateful. Being a single mother, she had welcomed Mark's offers to spend time with Jake. She remembered how Mark would take Jake camping, to amusement parks, and for long weekend trips. She had trusted him completely. Now those same memories made her stomach churn. Determined to find more answers, Claire went back to Jake's phone. She read through months of conversations. The texts from Mark became more concerning. There were coded references to meetings and activities that were never fully explained. Mark often reminded Jake to delete messages and not to tell anyone what they were doing. There were also missed calls late at night and vague pictures of locations where they had supposedly met. Her heart pounded as she realized Mark had carefully built a world of secrecy around Jake. Mark's messages were laced with control, always reminding Jake that people wouldn't understand, that this was their private thing. Claire's hands shook as she read more, each message feeling like a punch to the gut. It was clear that Mark had slowly manipulated Jake into silence. Claire began to remember all the time she had pushed her son to spend time with his uncle, thinking it would be good for him. She thought back to those moments when Jake had tried to avoid going but gave in after her gentle encouragement. It broke her heart to think that her well-meaning advice might have driven him deeper into something he couldn't escape. One evening, she quietly followed Jake after he left the house, with the excuse of going to the nearby park. From a distance, she watched as Jake stood near a street corner, waiting. Moments later, Mark pulled up in his car. Claire's heart sank. She stayed hidden as she saw them drive off together. She didn't know where they were going, but the sight confirmed her worst fears. Claire went home, her mind racing. She now understood that this wasn't just about the diapers. This was about control, fear, and something deeply wrong that had been happening for years. She realized that Jake had likely been trapped in a secret he didn't know how to break free from. It became painfully clear to Claire that she needed to act quickly. Whatever had been going on, it had gone on for too long. The person she had trusted most with her son had possibly been causing him the most harm. The answers she would uncover next could destroy the family she thought she knew. Claire's days became consumed with searching for the truth. Her heart was heavy, her mind restless. She now understood that something had been happening to Jake for a long time, and the more she thought about it, the more memories resurfaced, memories she had ignored, moments she had brushed off as minor or unimportant. She began piecing them together like fragments of a terrible puzzle. The signs were always there. She just hadn't known how to see them. She remembered the camping trip Jake had returned from when he was only 10. He had seemed quieter than usual, his excitement gone. Claire had asked him if everything was all right, but Jake had only shrugged and said he was tired. Then there was the birthday party where Mark had taken him out for the whole day. Jake came back withdrawn, his eyes avoiding hers. Claire had assumed it was just a boy growing up, dealing with his feelings in his own way. But now, those moments screamed for attention. Every piece of the past now pointed in the same direction. Mark had been using his position of trust to manipulate Jake, to trap him in a place of fear and shame. The diapers were not an accident, nor a phase, nor a misunderstanding. They were part of something Jake had been forced to accept, something he had been too afraid to speak about. Claire arranged for Jake to see a child psychologist, carefully explaining that it was just to help him with his anxiety. She hoped that, in a safe space, Jake would finally feel comfortable to share what he had been hiding. Weeks passed with slow progress. Jake barely spoke in the sessions at first. But then, something began to change. Quietly, Jake started to open up, sharing fragments that painted a painful and horrifying story. The psychologist contacted Claire with deep concern. Jake had described being made to wear diapers during the times he spent alone with his uncle. Mark had created rules around it, convincing Jake that this was a secret game, something that couldn't be shared with anyone. Over time, the game became more controlling. Mark used shame and guilt to keep Jake silent, threatening that no one would believe him if he spoke up, that his mother would be angry, that his life would be ruined. Claire felt like the air had been knocked out of her. She now understood that Jake had been carrying this weight for 4 long years, trapped in confusion, fear, and humiliation. The diapers were never about a health issue, they were a weapon. Used to control him, investigators were brought in immediately after the psychologist's report. Claire provided them with Jake's phone, the hidden diapers, and all the messages she had found. They worked carefully, knowing they needed strong evidence to confront Mark. As the case unfolded, it became clear that Mark had spent years manipulating Jake into silence. He had carefully built the illusion of a close relationship, using trust as his shield. It was the perfect hiding place inside a family, where no one thought to look. Claire felt torn between overwhelming guilt and fierce determination. She blamed herself for not seeing it sooner, but she also knew that by trusting her instincts, by digging deeper, she had finally uncovered the truth. Jake's quiet suffering had gone on for too long, but now the silence was breaking. As more evidence surfaced, the story revealed a deeper horror than Claire could have imagined. Jake had never been safe in the one place he should have felt protected within. His own family. What had started as a strange discovery under his bed had opened a door to a hidden nightmare that had been controlling his life for years. Investigation into Mark's actions moved quickly once the authorities had the evidence. The digital trail on Jake's phone, the psychologist's report, and the hidden items from his room formed a solid case. Mark was called in for questioning. At first, he calmly denied everything, pretending to be confused and hurt by the accusations. But the investigators had enough to keep digging. His calm surface began to crack as more details emerged. Forensic experts searched Mark's house and his electronic devices. What they found confirmed the darkest fears. There were disturbing files stored on his computer, and they matched some of the messages he had sent to Jake. There were also photos, locations, and written instructions that matched the secret meetings Jake had described during therapy sessions. It became clear that Mark had been carefully covering his tracks for years, using Jake's silence as his shield. Investigators pieced together how Mark had slowly gained complete control over Jake. It had started when Jake was only 10. Mark had introduced strange games that he said were special, private, and just for them. At first, they seemed harmless to a child who trusted his uncle. But over time, these games became more humiliating and terrifying. The diapers were one of the ways Mark broke Jake's confidence, convincing him that he was different, that no one else would understand, and that if he ever told anyone, his life would be ruined. Mark's method was slow, deliberate, and cruel. He taught Jake to hide the evidence, to lie if anyone asked questions, and to believe that Mark was the only one who truly cared about him. Jake was trapped by fear and confusion, feeling too ashamed to speak out. He thought no one would believe him, especially since Mark was loved and trusted by the entire family. As the truth came out, Claire's world shattered. She replayed the years in her mind, thinking of every time she had left Jake alone with Mark, every time she had encouraged their trips, believing they were good for her son. The guilt was unbearable, but she also knew that now she had to focus on helping Jake heal. She had broken the cycle by listening to the signs and refusing to look away. The investigators were able to confirm that Mark's manipulation of Jake had gone on for 4 years. The secret texts, the carefully planned meetings, and the psychological control all pointed to a calculated pattern of abuse. The most painful part was realizing how easily Mark had hidden it all in plain sight. No one had suspected him. He had been friendly, helpful, always there for the family. But behind that mask, he had been carrying out something horrific. When Mark was finally arrested, the community was stunned. Friends, neighbors, and even extended family couldn't believe it. People who had known him for years suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew about him. The police found enough evidence to bring multiple charges against him, and as more files were recovered from his devices, the case against him grew stronger. Claire sat in the courtroom during the hearings, listening to the details of what Mark had done. The pain was unbearable, but she stayed for Jake. She wanted him to know he was no longer alone, no longer trapped. Mark's calm, controlled image was finally gone. His secrets had been dragged into the light, and the walls he had built around Jake had been broken. The truth was out. The years of silent suffering were over, but the scars would remain. Claire knew that healing would take time, but she also knew that the nightmare had finally come to an end. Mark was found guilty and sentenced to a long prison term. The courtroom was filled with silence as the judge delivered the final words. The man who had once been trusted, loved, and welcomed into the family had been living a secret life filled with manipulation and cruelty. His arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. No one could believe that the smiling uncle who attended barbecues and birthday parties was capable of such horror. The betrayal was deep, not just for Claire and Jake, but for everyone who had once seen Mark as part of their safe, familiar world. For Claire, the end of the trial did not bring peace. She found herself trapped in endless questions about the past. How had she missed the signs? How had she allowed Jake to suffer for so long without seeing it? The guilt sat heavy on her shoulders, but she also knew that she had done what she could when she finally discovered the truth. She had chosen to believe her instincts, to fight for her son, even when the story was confusing and painful. Jake began his long journey toward healing. Therapy became a regular part of his life. The sessions were slow and difficult at first. He struggled to talk about the years he had spent hiding, living under the weight of secrets he had been forced to keep. The shame and confusion did not disappear overnight. There were days when he withdrew again, lost in silent pain, but there were also small victories. He started to sleep better. He stopped hiding his laundry, and little by little, he began to trust his mother again. Claire worked tirelessly to rebuild that trust. She made sure Jake knew she was there for him, that he was safe, and that none of what had happened was his fault. She promised him they would get through it together. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a sign that the darkness was losing its grip on their lives. The story of what had happened spread quickly, and people around them reacted with shock and anger. Some offered quiet support. Others could not believe Mark was capable of such things. Claire avoided those conversations. She focused only on her son, on their healing, and on the future. She knew the scars would remain, but she also knew that Jake's life did not have to be defined by what had been done to him. Jake slowly returned to school. His teachers were informed privately, and they worked to support him without drawing attention. His close friends remained by his side, though. Many never knew the full story. Claire was careful to protect his privacy, to give him space to grow without being trapped by the weight of public sympathy. The strange discovery that had started everything, a pack of diapers hidden under his bed, became a painful memory that Claire could never erase. It had been the first clue to a much bigger story, a signal that something was terribly wrong. It was a moment that shattered her understanding of her family and forced her to see the hidden pain her son had carried for years. Over time, life found a new rhythm. The days were not always easy, but they were moving forward. Claire and Jake both understood that healing was not about forgetting. It was about surviving, about reclaiming the pieces of their lives that had been stolen. What had happened would always be part of their story, but it would not be the only part. In the end, the quiet strength they found in each other became their greatest victory. Through trust, patience, and love, they began to build something new, something that could not be broken by the shadows of the past.